News Talk 550 KFYI, our continuing coverage now of the races all over the ballot and the ones that affect, of course, the whole state. We've been talking with corporation commissioners this week. We've had an opportunity to talk with three others, and joining us now is Bob Burns. Bob, you have been probably, I suppose, the guy who's brought more attention to the Corporation Commission than the Corporation Commission has probably ever had before, thanks to your quest for transparency. Can I say it that way?
Right.
Is that a fair a fair assessment?
Yes, it is.
So talk to me a little bit here, because the rumors of dark money floating around, APS involvement in putting some money allegedly, along with Pinnacle West, the parent company, and whether or not there was money that was then funneled into some of the campaign funds of other commissioners. If I overstep too, if my paraphrasing is incorrect, you feel free to stop me and correct me. With that, you said, listen, we've got to know who's making donations to the corporation commissioners. We have to know what's going on. Is that a fair description?
Correct. I think that's very important.
So where are you right now? We know that you were able to get a subpoena for APS, but that's kind of, as far as we know, we're in limbo at this point, as far as the public knows.
Yeah, APS sued,
right,
basically to squash the subpoena. We were in a time crunch. By the time we got the notice of the suit and found out that our legal staff was conflicted out of providing me with legal advice, it became apparent I needed to hire an attorney, and so there wasn't the time for me to do that in order to meet the dates that were required by the court. So we volunteered to stay the subpoenas in an agreement with APS to give us more time. And that's where we're at now. Those have been stayed. I have got an attorney. We are getting the attorney up to speed. So. All
right. So because of everything on the inside, you had to go personally get a private attorney. But the Corporation Commission is paying for that. They're footing the bill because this is within the capacity of your position as corporation.
No, I mean, I think any public official in the exercise of their duties is entitled to legal protection if someone sues. Yeah, I
think that's probably the public probably agrees with that. Sometimes reluctantly, when they see an official that is behaving badly, they say, "My goodness." I tell people I came from San Diego, and the taxpayers had to foot the bill for Bob Filner's attorneys throughout all of his sexual harassment stuff, and it was very frustrating. But at the same time, for situations like yours, it seems certainly appropriate that be covered. So here you are now in the middle of a re-election campaign. And this sort of controversy is kind of hanging out there. What does that do for you as a candidate now?
Well, actually, I started on this all the way back in between the primary and the general election in 2014. When I saw what was happening there, that was sort of the step two of the problem that I had with APS's behavior relative to public policy. There was a unanimous vote by the Commission in 2013 to do a study on re-regulation. APS spent like $5 million in an effort to stop that study. They renamed it DREG and put out what I would call a street fight, started a street fight rather than providing facts as is typical of Commission operation. Typically, you gather facts, you make decisions based on the facts. So that was first thing. And then when I saw what was happening in the election, it concerned me. I thought that was a real violation of the integrity of the Commission. The Commission is there to protect the ratepayers from overreach by utilities. And so utilities for 100 years have stayed out of the elections in the Corporation Commission races. And so when they got involved and at the level they got involved, I was very concerned about that. And so I started trying to figure out how to do something about it. There were a number of steps that I went through. I originally thought about taking the subpoena track, and I was convinced by staff and my legal advisors that a better way to do it would have been to hire an expert to do an investigation, find out what's going on. And so we moved to that method. There was an attempt to deny me funding And so I requested an attorney general's opinion. That took a couple of months to determine that I had the authority to act on my own. And so once that was concluded, we went forward with the scope of work for the investigation, and then also signed a contract with an attorney. The rest of the commission decided they didn't like it, and so they voted to kill the contract.
So even with all of this, and I don't know what the relationship is with you and APS. It sure seems you're trying to shed some light on some things, and I'm hearing frustration from you. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. It sounds as though you're frustrated with the process as it stands so far.
Well, yeah, it's been 2 years. I mean, the issue is APS has the legal authority based on a United States Supreme Court ruling to contribute unlimited amounts in campaigns.
And this is Citizens United you're talking
yes,
about. Yep.
Right. And so they have that right, and I'm not denying that right or trying to impact that right in any way. What I'm saying is that if they do contribute in a corporation commission race, they need to report when they spend so that the voters and the ratepayers understand who is supporting or opposing a candidate and what the message is, so that the voters are informed in that vote, because the commission sets the rates that the ratepayers pay.
Bob Burns is joining me right now. He is a current corporation commissioner, and he's running for re-election right now. He has been sort of the lone voice on that corporation commission, seeking such transparency, especially in the case of APS and their parent company, Pinnacle West. Despite all of that, the CEO of APS, Don Brandt, still says you're the guy. He says you're one of his choices. You, Andy Tobin, and Boyd Dunn are the guys that he says they'd like to have on there. That seemed very strange to people that saw that.
Well, I think that sort of would maintain the status quo.
Predictability on the part of the utility, and they can deal with predictability?
One against the rest.
Oh, I see. All right.
Okay. I mean, I'd still be the lone person trying to acquire the information, and so, the battle against one is probably easier one than it is against two, and especially three. If three votes could settle this in an eye blink.
Did anybody ever anticipate that the arguments over dark money contributions in the state of Arizona would be fought with the Corporation Commission? Normally, Corporation Commission is one of those ballot races that people go, what do they do? Isn't that a fair assessment? I mean, obviously, and you've worked with the Central Arizona Project and everything else, but most people, it's not something they pay close attention to.
No, and that's unfortunate, because it has an impact on your pocketbook every single day. I mean, if you use electricity, unless you're in Salt River Project's service area, you are affected by the decisions of the commission. If you are in a private water company, you're affected by the decision of the commission. Gas companies. So, there's a lot of authority there, and a simple few cents added to a bill totals millions of dollars in many cases.
Sure. Now, as we talk about these contributions, we talk about APS. One of the other sides of this, of course, is the conversations about solar in the state of Arizona. Solar City has been a supporter of yours, but a transparent supporter of yours.
Right.
And that's been a major difference between you and some of the other candidates that we've seen, is that there hasn't been any obfuscation of those donations. Some people would look at this and they'd say, my goodness, Bob Burns is going after APS and Solar City is funding that fight. Talk to me about that. Are there legitimate fears that people have, or is this just part of the way campaigning goes and, of course, regulation goes?
Well, I guess it's kind of the way campaigns go. But the funding that is being provided by Solar City and on my behalf is through an independent expenditure. So by law, I have no control whatsoever what they say or when they say it or who they say it to. It's a completely separate operation. So I have no control. I had asked early on, in fact, when Susan Bittersmith was still on the commission, we co-signed a letter and sent it to all of those that we are aware of that were appearing before the commission and said, would you all please voluntarily stay out of the campaigns for Corporation Commission? Now, we got back from the major utilities, the regulated utilities, water and gas and the other electric providers, a voluntary stay out, with the exception of APS. APS refused to voluntarily stay out.
Now, I got to check traffic here in just a second, but I want to continue now talking about solar in the state of Arizona, because as you're not over solar, it certainly integrates very closely with the regulated power companies that are going on here. And solar, of course, charges to rooftop solar individuals in Arizona has become a major topic, and it's something that many homeowners are paying very close attention to. So I want to get some of your thoughts on that, as well as some of those other things that the Corporation Commission actually does beyond just the conversations about the dark money, the campaign expenditures, things like that. Bob Burns joining me in studio right now. Our continuing coverage now of some of the races on the ballots that many people aren't paying as close attention to, but probably should be. Corporation Commission, of course, one that is very important to all of us. We'll continue that after we check your KFYI East Side, West Side traffic from the Sears Garage Doors Traffic Center. Here's Lee Powell and Steve Trump. Great News Talk 550 KFYI. It's Chris Merrill as we continue now our conversation with Bob Burns, sitting Corporation Commissioner. He has been sort of that lone voice fighting some of the dark money accusations that have been levied against other people in the Corporation Commission, and has brought him to a great deal of prominence. I'm watching the PBS debate that you and the other commission candidates had, and the one thing that struck me about this is that as the moderator would ask you a question, you would give an answer, and then the other four would fight. And what they all seem to have in common is that they all said, well, I agree with what Bob's doing. I agree with what Bob's doing. Boy, Bob's got some good ideas over there. Bob's got great ideas. So here it was, you had two Democrats and two other Republicans all pointing and saying, Bob's on the right track here. And now I look at this latest poll that just came out. It shows you in fourth place behind some of those guys. Right. How is it that you can be the guy everybody thinks is right, and yet here it is with the polling numbers, and people go, I'm not sure about this Bob Burns guy.
I have no answer. I was a leading vote getter in the primary, so I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Kind of the nature of politics, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and again, you mentioned earlier on the commission is the unknown part of government. Even though they're a very critical part and actually a fourth branch of the government.
Which is really interesting. I think a lot of people don't understand that in Arizona. In fact, I wonder, is that even something that's taught in civics classes in Arizona? I would guess not, because we drill down so hard on the whole three branches of government. But here in Arizona, we do have the fourth branch.
Right.
Fourth
branch of government. And basically only 7 states have the same model that Arizona has. So it is very unique and very powerful and very important. Because, again, everybody's pocketbook is affected by the decisions that are made there.
So one of the things that I pay very close attention to is the rooftop solar issues, and, of course, the connection fees and whether there's wholesale or retail rates and these sorts of things. People that are not that don't have rooftop solar probably aren't paying real close attention to it unless they're looking into it. And personally, we're in the sunniest state in the entire country. Phoenix is considered the sunniest metropolitan city in the entire country, and yet we seem to have these arguments over how much we should have rooftop solar. To me, it seems like a no-brainer. We ought to be able to figure this out as far as how much connection fees are and how much wholesale versus retail rates are. Tell me where you stand on this.
Well, I can't. I have to remain neutral on this issue until it comes to a final decision, which is scheduled for November. We have a docket at the commission. It's referred to as the value of solar docket. And that is our public bulletin board, if you will, where anybody with an issue or information relative to that issue can provide information, provide us with facts. And then as the data is collected, then we also go through a process where we have an administrative law judge, has evidentiary hearings where witnesses are sworn and have them testify and be cross-examined by those who disagree with them. That process has taken place over a number of months. And so now we were issued just at the beginning of the month a recommended order by the administrative law judge, 170 plus pages. So That's now our book to review, and to we can have comments relative through the docket so that everybody that's involved in the case knows where we're at and what our position is so they can respond. And that goes all the way up till the date of the actual hearing where we will vote on that particular issue.
So through the administrative law judge, this is an opportunity, I suppose, for people to decide what facts are actually facts. Is that sort of the process?
Well, that's the purpose of sworn testimony and cross-examination, so that if one party presents a number, it's subject to cross-examination by the person that might not agree with that number, and they have to be able to prove their number is correct.
So Bob Burns, our guest here, sitting corporation commissioner, in a little bit different position than other interviews we've had. Because of your position, you're not allowed to comment on these, whereas others who are running for a particular position, who are running for your seat, actually, are able to give their opinions on it. But here you are.
Well,
as the incumbent, a little bit hamstrung on that.
Well, they have to be a little bit careful, though, too, even as a candidate. Now, this decision will be made before they actually are sworn in. Okay, but there are other decisions in the pipeline, that APS rate case, for example. So they have to be careful about what they say relative to those cases, because they could be, accused of prejudgment. And if the party accusing them is successful and has them removed from the vote, then
that changes the whole composition of the vote.
Absolutely, yes.
Bob Burns, my guest here, a corporation commissioner. What do you see now? And we talked with one of the other commissioners earlier this week about some of the water issues, especially the rural water. And I wanted to get your feedback on that. The Southwest facing a drought. We just got news this week. La Nina is going to continue to give California a drought, which many people in Arizona say, well, forget California, it'll fall into the ocean. But they have dibs on the Colorado River, so it's kind of an issue for us. We come second place behind this much larger state that's having an even larger drought crisis. What do you see, especially with the municipal water districts and the rural water districts? What do you see as the future in that regard?
Well, the municipal we don't regulate. Cities they regulate their own.
The rural then, excuse me.
Rural, typically rural, and in the case of Arizona, we have a large number of small water companies. They struggle. If there is a requirement, a federal requirement like an arsenic cleanup, for example, they don't have the rate base to cover the expenses that it takes to correct that infrastructure. So there's some real struggling water companies. We have been working since I've been on the commission, trying to come up with means to better address that. We've talked about the possibility of consolidation. Pennsylvania at one time had apparently like 600 water companies, and they went through a process of consolidation and got it way down. I think they're around the 200 mark. Arizona's in the 300 plus category. So there's a lot of problems to be solved in the water area. Typically, the commission members kind of end up in picking up on an item and following that. I've been concentrating on the electrical generation side of things pretty much since I've been there. Chairman Little has picked up on the water. Chairman Bittersmith, when she was there, she was working on the water stuff. Andy Tobin, who's now on the commission, is working the water issues.
Well, talk to me about the electrical generation too, because they all work together. Especially when we get reports of Hoover Dam is just not putting out the kind of power that it has in the past. Lake Mead incredibly low right now. So, from your area of specialty, then.
Well, and I did serve a couple of years on the Central Arizona Project Board, so I am familiar with some of those issues. Lake Mead is at the point of possible declaration of shortage, and if the federal government declares a shortage on the Colorado River, Arizona is the junior partner in this southern basin, and we take the first cut.
Okay.
And so one of my concerns and one of my thoughts on that issue is that there are a number of different kinds of renewables out there. You have solar, for example. You have wind. You have fuel cells. You have combined heat and power. Storage is becoming a big issue in the solar, especially in the solar area. And so they don't use water. the nuclear plant, the thermal generation plants that we have here in Arizona, they use water for cooling and for steam to turn the turbine. So that there needs to be a thorough examination of that issue, for example, as we move forward and expand our generation portfolio, if you will. Then we need to consider the use of water, I think, in that calculation.
Bob Burns joining us here. And Bob, the last question then is, as we look at some of these potential issues, and I appreciate the commission looking at issues before they become even larger issues. Is this going to involve more interstate coordination, perhaps with New Mexico and some of the projects they're working on, perhaps talking to California? Maybe we follow some of the advice of one of the presidential candidates. We just build a wall between us and California, and we tell them to get their own water.
Well, it isn't only water, obviously, but
tell them to get their own wind. Tell them to get their own sand. I don't even care.
But California actually has proposed a mechanism to address some of the issues relative to generation of electricity.
Okay.
Called the Energy Imbalance Market, EIM. APS has just joined that organization, and basically the theory is that you have an organizer, if you will, with a large arena of producers of power, all different kinds, okay? The wind's blowing over here, sun's shining over here, wind drops off, sun's still shining, you can draw power. And so that's the theory behind the EIM, and it's been proven to work. And so there's savings available for the ratepayers because APS is able to pick up electricity cheaper on the margins. They can't replace their own generation stuff with what is in that EIM population, if you will.
Mm-hmm. All right, Bob Burns. Listen, Bob, I really appreciate you being on the program today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, this has been very educational, and while other people, and I was accused earlier this week by one of the other commissioners of being a geek. Can you believe that? Because I'm just fascinated by this stuff. I just whatever it is, maybe it's a small kid coming up in a rural town that I pay real close attention to this stuff. So thank you so much for your time today and explaining it as you did, and thank you for your continued efforts in exposing and shining some light on some of this the campaign contributions that have been going on.
Well, I hope to be able to complete that task.
All right, Bob Burns, current corporation commissioner, up for re-election here and asking for your vote.